Welcome to another episode of Health Creators. This is Liv, and I'm joined here today by Elena Rueda, CEO and founder of Dama Health, transforming the future of precision contraception. So Elena, today in most countries, if I'm a 12, 13, 14-year-old girl and I go to the OBGYN for the first time, whether it's for a general checkup, acne, period pain, or headache, they're gonna prescribe me oral contraceptives. Why is that a bad thing?
Well, for starters, I think it's probably important to kind of contextualize what happens at the moment for a 16 or 14-year-old girl. I think contraception is not only used in the world for birth control reasons. It can be used for treating hormonal-based conditions such as endometriosis or PCOS, for example. It can also be used for acne and a lot of other underlying like endocrine issues. And so a lot of the time when women do go very early to the OBGYN or to their doctor, there's a discussion that is being had whether, you want to take something to support you with these symptoms and these other conditions, but at the same time, help you with birth control. And so actually, in general, OBGYNs and doctors do prescribe the most common form, which is the oral combined contraceptive pill. In the UK, it's microgynon 30. And this is usually because it's actually the form of contraception which has the least blood clot risk for at a population level. So it's the safest to prescribe, but also most effective at treating, at basically preventing pregnancy for the majority of the population. And then when we start to think, general population, there's obviously outliers, and there's people that don't react the same way. And so we're seeing a lot more and more that, women are having different symptoms, reacting very differently. And that is not, part of the way that contraception is being prescribed at the moment. It's not being personalized to the individual. It starts off in this trial and error process until basically you, as a woman, stand up, or as a user, stand up and say, actually, I want to try something else, or this is not working for me. We don't have that first line of screening being done to make sure that, we are making sure it's personalized for the individual.
And when I was speaking to Anna from Imply the other week, she was mentioning about how we give the same dose of contraceptives to, a 14-year-old girl and a 40-year-old woman. So
absolutely. And you can imagine, obviously, when you're 14 years old, you haven't really developed your hormonal, endocrine system to its full capacity at that age. You're still changing, your body is changing. And so sometimes really getting, wrong doses or really high doses at that age could be quite detrimental. And I think smaller women, smaller bodies can, metabolize estrogen and progesterone very differently, but also your genetics and other underlying conditions that you may have. So it's super important that we do take these things into account. And unfortunately for many women, the side effects could be quite detrimental, which leads them to having a very bad first experience, which can have a really long time effect on just their relationship with contraception in general. So really getting that first experience and that first appointment right is really important, and educating the women around the topic as well.
Because this is essentially a medication that women are on for, let's say, the majority of their reproductive life.
Yeah.
But the way that it's done today, from my understanding, is a lot of trial and error. So you get given one line of treatment. If it doesn't work, then there's a second line. If it doesn't work, then there's a third line. And it is this randomness that you're trying to fix.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one thing is also just how comfortable certain OBGYNs and practitioners are in prescribing different forms of contraception, but also what is available in that country, what is accessible. Not all brands are available. Especially, in the UK, for example, we have the NHS. So there's certain brands and formulations that are approved by the NHS. And if you want something different, you need to source that elsewhere. But it is mainly a trial and error. On average, a woman will go and try maybe between 3 to 5 different methods before finding one that is suitable. But this could essentially just be because, their preferences in life change. Like at one moment, they don't want something in their body. In another moment of their life, they don't mind getting an injection or an implant. They may have different symptoms come up at different phases of their, reproductive journey. And so we need to adapt to these changes and to this like personalization. So really putting everyone through the same line of treatment is not always the best. And we do see a lot of women coming back into the industry, into the consultations, just returning because they're not finding the right forms that fit them.
One thing I've always found is quite bizarre, right, about this entire, I guess, experiment. It's almost like an experiment because we're giving half the population this medication on a consistent basis. But these hormones that you give people really do impact mood and even to some extent decision making, right? So what are your thoughts on this like entire notion of like, you know, you start at a certain age, let's say like 14, taking this contraception, it causes a different balance of hormones in your body, and then you have to come off of it when you want to conceive, and it changes almost the way that you process and think. And a good example of this is, you know, this whole case study that is, I guess, going viral online about how women who meet their potential future husbands on contraception then come off of it when they're married and are no longer attracted, right? What are your thoughts on like the broader issue and these cases that we're seeing today?
Yeah, I mean, with any exogenous hormone treatment or endocrine, you know, when you mess with the endocrine system, there's always going to be a side effect. So I think one thing that we're really excited for in the future is seeing further development happening on non-hormonal forms of contraception and engineering around non-hormonal forms of contraception, because I think that will really help solve the issue for the women who really do not react well with contraception, and especially the hormonal compounds. For many, actually, the majority of the products in the market are hormone-based. So if you actually cannot take hormone-based, you're really limited. It seems like you have millions of options and 200 brands, but actually, if you can't take progesterone, you can't take estrogen or derivatives of that, you're actually quite limited to very little, options. And I think the broader issue is really being able to screen and identify who can metabolize, who reacts well to these hormones, or who at least can tolerate the side effects well, and like which people cannot, because for some it actually really does support them. And I think getting the right product to the right person, the right drug to the right person is fundamental. And also, you know, this hypeness of kind of these stories, sometimes correct, sometimes not correct, coming into the market. Women being afraid of, not taking birth control because of, blood clot risk. And really birth control can support a lot of women as well. And I think the power is now in using, the latest research and the latest science to be able to say, hey, who's at risk, who's not, to then really start bringing that intervention into clinical practice.
So talk me through what Dama Health is doing, because I think a lot of what we've been talking about is maybe framing the problem a bit. But how does Dama solve the problem?
Yeah, so at Dama Health, we are developing medical screening tests and tools that can allow clinicians, but also women patients, to be able to identify essentially which contraceptive option is best suited for her or for them. And we do this by screening your medical history, your preferences, your past experience. We've developed a medical algorithm to be able to do that. And then also we're developing a genetic test, which is the exciting part where we bring precision medicine and we look at variables and variants in your genes that can help us understand, do you metabolize estrogen fast or slow, progesterone fast or slow? Are you more likely to gain weight? What is your migraine risk? What is your blood clot risk? All very important things that a GP or an OBGYN may ask you in your appointment. But as a 14-year-old girl, you may have absolutely no idea, if you do have a risk of blood clot. So instead of kind of guessing it, we test for it and really try to support and at least bring that in line, remove that risk at a first instant with the clinician.
So you do a genetic test, plus screening other factors as well to help match women to specific contraceptives.
Exactly.
And I think we briefly spoke about this, but the DNA component becomes important when you're looking at things like how do people respond to hormones and how do they metabolize different drugs and molecules, and what are the side effects that you might have from that speed of metabolizing these components.
Absolutely. And I can give you an example there. So, our chief medical officer, Dr. Aaron Lazarevitz, in his research, he looked at one very specific gene called the ESR1 gene. So it's the estrogen receptor. And he measured, the differences in weight gain with women on the implant and with women who had a variant, a different, mutation or a different variant of that gene compared to the general population, the most common gene, actually gained 14 kilos on average of weight compared to like 2 to 3 of the average population. So it just comes to show how, really our hormones and everything, from how we synthesize them, how we have proteins that circulate, how they bind to our bodies, has a huge impact on the amount of hormone we have, running around our bodies on a day-to-day. And so if you're someone who cannot release and cannot get rid of that, you are more likely to suffer from certain symptoms and side effects. And so really knowing that information early on is a key piece that you as a doctor can then share with the patient. You can say you are most likely to gain weight on this form, or you're more likely to have a migraine, or, not experience symptoms in that one. And then that's a choice that you help empower your patient with. You help them make the decision as well by giving them that informed information.
Yeah, and that could significantly improve quality of life. 14 kilograms versus like 3 is a lot.
Absolutely. And everyone's different, right? Like maybe there are people who want to gain that weight. Maybe there are people who absolutely want to avoid that weight. And the same way that people may not, find it so intolerable to have a headache every once in a while, if it means that, their heavy bleeding or their really, heavy pain can be removed or can be avoided. So it's really finding the fine balance and helping women make that risk kind of judgment.
And why is this a company now versus 5 years ago, 10 years ago? Like, what has changed in the world that allows you to do what you're doing?
Well, for starters, accessibility to genetic sequencing. I think we spoke about this before, but, sequencing only 20 years ago would cost, the whole genome sequencing would cost around 100 million to do, which is absolutely unobtainable. Now we've actually managed to get, genome sequence sub $200, $100, which is super exciting because it means that finally we can bring, this type of testing into the day-to-day, into the clinic. And I think it's only going to get cheaper in the future. And so utilizing, that technology and the knowledge we have of this type of testing and research now is going to be kind of where we're heading into the future with precision medicine. So
interesting. So it's now 1 million times cheaper.
1 million times cheaper, yes.
1 million times cheaper to sequence your genome, which means now we can improve the accessibility of this type of service, which may have been not as accessible to general population. And I guess the second thing, I wonder how COVID has impacted that as well.
Yeah, I think, of course, everyone now has heard of, genetic sequencing, variants, how useful, it is to actually be able to sequence at speed. And so I think actually just the key message and the way that, in general, the population reacts to the word genetic sequencing or sequencing is less frowned upon, it's less scary. So I think from an educational perspective, the general population has been educated a lot during COVID in terms of, new technologies and what that means for general population health and health outcomes. And I think people understand that, genetics can support in precision medicine, which can support in more precise, treatments. And I think COVID has really not only sped up the pipeline and helped, make just lab work go faster and regulatory hurdles become less of a restriction, but also like now that we're doing our screening and we're doing our study, we're having no problem in recruiting women because people know what genetic sequencing is. They're not scared about it. It's a topic that you can kind of talk a lot more with the general public, and they understand where you're coming from. You don't need a PhD anymore to understand kind of what genetics means in the context of health.
And this idea, it was kind of birthed from a combination, I guess, of you being at Merck previously, and then from Imperial. But talk me through, like, what was the journey to arrive here? Because I know you were sitting on the idea for some time before you really went full on in.
Yeah, I think it did start kind of when I was 16, 15. I went to my doctor just to see if they could prescribe something for my hormonal acne. And they gave me the pill. They gave, as we kind of talked about, it's kind of the first line usually for things like that. And I went home, I started taking this pill, and I started to feel really, really horrible. Like, I started gaining weight, I wasn't feeling myself. I noticed like a huge change all of a sudden. And then kind of months later, not only did I decide, okay, I'm not going to take this anymore, I felt like something was wrong. But then months later, I found out that this pill was actually banned in a number of countries because of the high blood clot risk. And I was, at that point, I was looking to study science, and this just completely shook me. I was like, how can, you give something to a 16-year-old the same way you could just prescribe like paracetamol, and the risk is as high as like, you could have a blood clot into your brain and potentially, die. This was just like shocking. So I think that idea just stuck with me for while I was doing my undergraduate, while I was doing my just my studies, and then living with 6 girls at university. We all had a very crazy experience again on hormonal birth control and birth control options, and everyone was reacting so differently. So I just started every time getting more and more interested in this topic and understanding like, why is there no better way of just finding the right person and then prescribing them the right drug? We have options, and we have the science, and we have the tools in other areas of health, right? But the women's health industry is just lagging. So I started doing my research, and I found Dr. Aaron Lazarevitz. He's an OBGYN. He was actively recruiting for trials in this space and really trying to bring precision medicine into the industry of women's health. And so that really inspired me to say, right, how can we actually make this accessible? And so that's where the digital component of our company comes in. You make things accessible if you can bring technology, SaaS platform, and then ideally, service it to multiple stakeholders, clinicians, labs, or the women themselves, so that they can use that research and that those insights to better find the contraceptive that they're looking for.
Why do you think there is this gap in women's health?
I think this is a commonly talked topic nowadays, but we've just not really been using women in trials for many years. We haven't recruited for women in their reproductive years. Usually menopausal women have been used in trials, or very small samples. And I think so this huge lag of collecting the symptom data, collecting just really important data points that we're now seeing and we are now collecting just hasn't previously existed. So even innovating in this space, you kind of need to start from scratch. You need to collect that data yourself. If you all just do a simple exercise of going on PubMed and just typing in women's health or contraception, you're probably going to get 300 search items come back. Whereas you put something like oncology, or you put something like rheumatoid arthritis, and you're going to see the huge difference in just how many publications and search items you get in the field of women's health. And I think it just starts from there. Unfortunately, we started looking and investigating this field just 20, 30 years too late. So we're just catching up, to be honest.
And let's say genetic testing for contraception is one use case. The reason I find this interesting is there was this huge controversy with 23andMe, in the Asian community, essentially, where a lot of people who are Asian would take 23andMe and it would just say like, you are 99% Asian. And so people would start posting their result online being like, great, like, thanks, I paid like $300 and I'm 99% Asian. Already knew that, cool. And then founders like the founder of Circle DNA came out with the Asian version, right? So a genetic test that would tell you a breakdown of like, where in Asia am I from? And like, what are the different components of being Asian? I wonder if outside of just contraception, there's a use case here where we're saying, let's look more into the genetics of women. Let's look at this group of individuals. Like, what are the different things they'll care about? Kind of like in 23andMe and Circle DNA, they tell you, you sleep, you're more likely to sleep below 7 hours, 7 to 8 hours, 9+, for example. Yeah. I wonder if you are envisioning something like this, where you almost look at DNA as a whole and look at what are the different phenotypes in women that women will care about. Yeah.
I mean, even 23andMe has recently and started to kind of incorporate more and more like female specific insights like ovarian health and, and there is a lot of research going into longevity, menopause. So absolutely, I think you're totally right. Like the data on genetics and just genetic solutions in general is just as good as what was fed into the research. And so if you're only investigating a certain population, you're going to have really great results on that population, but you're really going to exclude another population as a result. And I think there is a lot more, data that can be coming in and feeding, insights into the women's health space. It's definitely kicking off with the fertility world. Genetic testing is quite commonly done.
But for specifically Dama Health, like, do you see a use case outside of just contraception where you could use what you're doing in contraception for other?
Absolutely, like women's health panel, essentially. And I think if you can know how your body reacts to hormones, you can support women making decisions in their fertility journey, but also in their menopause journey down the line. There's so much that can be, transferred and transferable. And we're starting with contraception, but we're definitely not ending there.
And what's the kind of wider vision then with Dama? So we can start with like what you're currently targeting. So contraception, and what do you see like in the next year, 2 years, 5 years, in terms of what you're trying to achieve?
First achievement is really bringing, precision medicine into women's health, which is just not, you'd be surprised, but there's not that many companies going into the field or really, innovating there. I think being able to start really identifying like even hormonal concentrations on individuals, like instead of just having these set standard 30 mg, 2 mg, you're really able to at first instance provide the right concentration of hormones for that individual. And you can only do that if you do the right tests and you understand that individual's predispositions and just hormonal metabolism. But I think in the future, just really supporting in better drug development, supporting and understanding, are there certain populations or women or individuals that these methods are just not working for them at all, and that, maybe pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies have not been able to identify or haven't identified. And I think that's really exciting to be able to play a role in that, to be able to identify, underrepresented groups and potentially support the industry in developing better solutions for them. But also, I think I mentioned this briefly before, but trying to find new ways of, developing birth control and mucus engineering, things that don't just necessarily use our hormones, because we as a company we're limited by, the products that are in the market. So we can only recommend what's in the market. But if the market products are not optimal or they're not, they could be better, we're limited as well in what we can recommend. So really excited to see kind of the development happening, and also the future of maybe male contraception too, and the development of that, because a lot of the questions we ask when we screen is also like, it's a conversation between you and your partner as well. It's not what do you want to take for your body, but it's your lifestyle. It's everything around you. Are you an athlete? do you have a partner? Do you need something that is, like you take every day? Are you forgetful? Do you don't want to take it every day? So it's understanding that, your contraceptive journey is not just your body, but also your environment. And so, being able to then, develop Dama, or say, actually, now you're doing like a couples test, or you're doing would be amazing, that we can also recommend, other methods, not just put the burden on the woman. So I think there's many avenues, but I think there's huge room for improvement in the space and development. But I think it starts by collecting real world data on the symptoms and basically how women are reacting, and how people assigned female at birth are reacting, so we can do better for them.
So building a picture of basically the key negative symptoms that women experience today by collecting essentially their insights plus their DNA. And then you can basically work out, okay, like these women who have this effect tend to have this gene, and the others have another gene. And then once you've built up this base platform of data, I guess there's a lot you can do with that. Yeah. You were mentioning mucus-based?
Yeah, I mean, mucus engineering. So
what does that mean? Yeah.
So essentially there's a company in Copenhagen called Circle, and they're developing a contraceptive method that's non-hormonal, where it will essentially engineer, the mucus in a woman's uterus, so that it can create essentially a sperm bridge, right? But with your, but using the science of mucus engineering.
So how does it work? Do you take this long term, or do you just take
it before? We have to ask them.
It builds a mucus layer in your uterus.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And just finding creative, innovative ways that we can create contraceptive methods. But I think, you're right. There's also epigenetics, there's proteomics, so the environment, and we can definitely, it's exciting to see how we could maybe utilize, omics in general, and different genetic testing to be able to predict even better the more research we do around this area. But we need to start somewhere. So we're building that pipeline of variants for contraception to start with.
So the idea, I guess, is to move away from hormones ultimately, right?
Not really move away from hormones, but be able to identify who needs these hormones and who can avoid them. Because I think, like you rightly put, it's kind of like standard care where every kind of 16-year-old will be put on hormones. But I think we need to ask ourselves, like, ultimately, is that the best, we can do for these young women? There's so many people that, because of hormones, can live a really, better quality of life because they can not get out of bed, or if they don't have their contraceptive option as like a first line, treatment for their conditions. So I think we are by no means saying hormones are bad or anything. And I think that's something that, we really push against, but it's understanding who is going to react better and who is it going to help, and who is it maybe just not, so that we can just make sure that we're treating the right people, because this is similarly being done in other areas of health, and we don't just put everyone on the same treatments. There's usually screening tests and tests that test towards this, but so yeah, I think it's just more than anything identifying, so that you may work really well with hormones, I may work terribly with hormones, and it's something that we should be aware of when we're quite young to then make these decisions, because they all compile. They compile in how we go in our day-to-day, the decisions we make, and sometimes you take months of, if not years, to realize that you're in the spiral of, oh, this wasn't working for me, and I just realized this.
And I guess that kind of underpins this whole precision medicine movement that's happening across the world.
Yeah.
Of how do we make medication less dirty?
Yeah. I think also just a lot of, resources are wasted, people coming back into the system. We know that primary health doctors are really struggling right now in the NHS. And so how can we help also, the providers? How can we make sure that we can triage, the right people? Like, this person absolutely needs an implant or, an IUD, whereas maybe these people absolutely, there's a risk, there's a contraindication. They don't even need to come into the clinic. You can see someone else who needs to be seen, like, with more priority.
Do you know the cost numbers of how much costs it, how much money we're burning on people just being prescribed the wrong?
Well, at least 20 to 30% of contraceptives just go to the bin. Unfortunately, these numbers as well are not being collected because, if you discontinue, you don't really let your doctor know. You just stop taking. So it's one of those areas as well where just the data, again, is missing. We're not collecting. A woman isn't going back and saying, hey, I've stopped taking my third month and I've thrown the rest out. So it's quite a difficult space to navigate in terms of statistics. But in the UK at the moment, there is a waiting list of 6 months to get an IUD insertion. So if you want to get, an implant or an IUD, but you need to wait 6 months, what are your other options? And so it's kind of forcing you to say, well, I'm going to probably have to take what's available to me, because the consequence of that is an unwanted pregnancy in some cases. And so I think really being able to make that space in the healthcare system and also allocate the resources more effectively is going to be really important, so that we aren't having huge amounts of unwanted pregnancies or abortions as a result, because women have no options or feel like they don't have access or options, because in some cases the side effects are quite bad that women would rather just not go there again. And that's quite sad to hear.
Yeah, and I know you're operating now mainly in the UK, but do you see kind of global differences right now in contraception, and especially in the US, where some regulatory changes are happening?
Yeah, I mean, in the US, obviously, kind of developing contraception and is more government-led, but in some cases now, because of state legislations and other political reasons, it is harder for a lot of women to maybe get access to the same forms as originally. So, but I think telehealth and different providers are being really creative in the way that they're giving accessibility to contraception to women. It's also very interesting how you see patterns in different populations just preferring different methods in different regions, and that's also really interesting to kind of investigate, understand why. So we knew from some of our research, for example, in the US in a certain region, there was a very high Puerto Rican community that just wanted implants, and so it kind of gives us this insight of women talk to other women and so word of mouth is huge when it comes to birth control, and so that's why getting the right thing to the right person is also very important, because bad stories spread like wildfire, and the consequences of that at health economic and population level could be quite high if you're having a lot of women, having to abort because of unwanted pregnancies, because of what they're hearing. And so we're also trying to really drive that education and helping people understand that her experience or their experience is not yours, for numerous reasons, and this is why, and let us help you understand them.
Interesting. So the precision component also supports this misinformation that happens.
Absolutely. There's people out there who unfortunately become pregnant on different forms of contraception, and they don't know why. And it's a 99% efficacy on the sheet. It's supposed to be like one of the best forms of contraception, but they become pregnant. And we're starting to realize that it's things like having the clearance gene, the way you metabolize or not, means that actually for that individual, it's not 98%, effective. It's less. And so absolutely, these like one-off cases actually are more common than we know, but we're not taking that into account.
And maybe they're not reported.
Yeah.
So I'll finish off with one question, but if you had to leave the world with one impact with Dama Health, what would that be?
To bring precision medicine into the field of women's health. I think this is something that our team and the work we're doing is really like driving us towards. Women's health has been underrepresented for many years, and I think using technology, using genetics can now start to really make a huge difference and speed it up. And also just being able to leave the world knowing that women can go into an OBGYN clinic or a primary health clinic and have the right information, the right data on their bodies, and just feel empowered and understand the implications of these decisions, because contraception is not something you take as a one-off when you have a headache or, when you're feeling low. It's something you take for years, during the majority of your reproductive life as a woman. And it has downstream implications depending on the route you take. So really trying to help give the right tools and education so that women can feel empowered and not leave it purely to chance. So really eliminate and eradicate the guesswork, because there are tools and research and people like ourselves that are trying to help bring that precision into the field of women's health forward, so that women don't have to suffer unnecessarily.